Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Underrated Movie Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss films that are underrated, underappreciated, and ones that have gone under the radar and passed most people by. We are in the middle of a mini-series called 8-Bit Cinema, where I am looking at underrated video game films. And the film I'm going to be talking about today is it's probably the first video game movie I ever saw. Definitely, I know it's the first video game movie for a lot of people. That would be Pokémon, the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. And joining me is a returning guest, somebody who knows probably a lot more about video games than I do. In fact, he hosts his own show covering video games and talking to indie game designers and all that good stuff. Kurosh Jozavi, host of the KJP show. How's it going, Kurosh?
Thank you for having me, Derek. Always a pleasure to come back. I wanted to make sure I defend my title as on as many different shows you got. Just get me in there, even if it's for like 5 minutes. Just get me in there, just so I hold that title. But yeah, thank you for having me. As you were saying, I cover a lot of game stuff in my show, the KJP show, on YouTube at youtube.com/@KujoPrime. I mostly focus on indie games and game developers, celebrating and elevating them. But I also, since last we spoke, I'm also now a writing correspondent at the journalist site Temple of Geek. I cover video games. Yeah. I'm a video game correspondent there, doing reviews and impressions and opinion pieces. I was actually working on a few of my pieces right now. They should be out by the time this comes out, so I'll talk about them here. I'm reviewing the Harry Potter Quidditch Champions game. It's like just Quidditch. And
dude, I loved that game as a kid. That game was so fucking great. The World Cup one or whatever.
Yeah, there's the World Cup one. This one's almost like I would say, like, imagine NBA 2K or like FIFA, but for Quidditch.
Okay, hell yeah, dude.
It's kind of interesting that how it takes. So that one, and then the one I'm really excited about and I love so much and I can't wait to share is my review of the Marvel vs. Capcom Fighting Collection. I'm a Marvel vs. Capcom 2 just diehard fan.
Here.
I love it. It's Marvel baby. So
that's awesome. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's fucking great shit. But yeah, so super stoked to have you on, man, and to be talking about this movie, Pokémon, the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back. There's 2 subtitles, so I want to make sure that I got that out of the way. Of course, for the episode 150, appropriately enough, of Underrated. So
nice.
Should we make this a 2-parter? Where it's 150 and 151, given the Mew interactions in there?
Right. I was like, should I do it for 150 or 151? What would be more appropriate? I was like, I'll do it 150, but
Nope.
But yeah, so I'm a really big Pokemon fan. Are you a big Pokemon guy yourself, Kurosh?
My God, man. The time this movie came out to this day, I think it shaped so much of Pokemon has shaped so much of what type of gamer I've been and what kind of player I am. I remember fondly the moment it kind of shifted for me was I was at a Walmart. I frequented the Walmart. There was the electronics section. They had the TVs above where you could just crane your neck back and you could play either the Nintendo 64 or the Super Nintendo that they had on demo. There was always Super Metroid. But then I remember when the Game Boy Color was available, and I was like, I wasn't even thinking about it, but I was looking at all my friends were huge into GoldenEye. And I wanted GoldenEye. I was like, man, I love playing at their place, but I want to play GoldenEye at home. I love it so much. It's so cool. I've always only just played the multiplayer. I wonder what the campaign's like. And so I asked my folks, I was like, can I get GoldenEye, please? I only get like 1, maybe 2 games a year. And for some reason, I don't know what the reason was, my dad was like, why don't you get a Game Boy Color instead? That looks more viable. I'm like, that's an option? And so I was like, you just changed the game. And so I was like, yes, I will get a Game Boy Color and I will get Pokemon Blue. And I think he regrets that decision because ever since I played that, like, so much more of my time, I could have been a cocktail martini drinking Bond fanatic and enthusiast. Instead, I went down the Pokemon rabbit hole. I feel bad because I made him. It was him, yeah, because my mom and him switched off on movies and he took me to see this movie in theaters. And I remember looking back, I'm like, they're not even talking. And besides the humans, they were just characters. Like, from a parent's perspective, they were like, they're just saying their name for the next 90 minutes. Why did they? I'm sure he had a canon event moment of like, why did I let him get the Game Boy?
Right. That was such a sliding doors. There could have been a whole different Kuro. That's really funny.
Yeah. But even to this day, I'm level 48 in Pokemon Go.
Hell yeah, dude.
Active player. That's my shiny Lucario. I got
Oh,
there.
nice. Fuck yeah, dude. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Got that at
Lucario's one of my
Comic-Con.
favorites. Nice.
If that speaks to my Pokemon experiences.
Your credentials, yeah. But yeah, man, it sounds like you have the real Pokemon credentials. I'm the same. I was the same way. We're about the same age, I think. So
Yeah.
I got my Game Boy. And this is, I'm pretty sure blue or I think it was actually red was my first ever Game Boy game. And,
Okay.
And I think it might have been my first ever video game. I can't remember. I might have had I did have the N64 first, I think. But like I was just glued to it. Like I had Pokemon Red, then I bought it again, Pokemon Blue, and then I bought Pokemon Yellow when it came out because I was like, oh, this is just like the show, and I played every generation of Pokemon since. I'm still very much into the mainline games. I'm like one of those psychopaths who like still catches them all. Like I in my Pokemon home, I have like all 1024 or whatever Pokemon they're up to now.
In the database,
Yeah. I'm still written. Do you still play the mainline games at all?
Oh yeah, I would say I took a bit of a break somewhere I think it was in the 3DS era with the Alolan and Black and White 1 and 2. Those were the ones I really missed. Everything else I've played religiously. Diamond and Pearl. I was big into EV training and a little bit of IV breeding that drove me nuts. But nowadays I've played Arceus, Scarlet and Violet have been a big favorite of mine. But like nothing, I think hits the same way that the OG stuff had.
Yeah,
the designs were so crisp and so just novel and genuine and like they're great still. Like to see it go this far, but like I still harken back to the OG stuff.
Yeah, I miss the sprites. Once they went fully 3D, it lost a little bit of the magic. And now they're on such a crunch and stuff. To get those games out, which interestingly I think is kind of like the Pokemon franchise has almost become like a victim of its own success in a lot of ways, where it's like if there's a Zelda game, it can get delayed. Pokemon games, they have to come out on time because the show's coming out, the cards are coming out. Like you've got to have that shit ready to go every 2 years or whatever. It's got to have or 3 years. There's got to be like a new.
It's the Call of Duty of Nintendo.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, those old games, I think up to Black and White were just like all for me, like just perfect, just bangers, But yeah, and then through the games, I eventually got into, of course, the cards, and then the show, and then and because the show, I watched this movie, and it was just such a fucking cultural phenomenon. Seeing this movie, just the way Pokemon had just taken over the world.
Yeah.
What was it like for you as a kid watching this film?
It's wildly looking back on it now because I feel like if you look at I kind of think about it as like it was a natural this game is hot, this show is hot, these cards are hot, then movie.
Yeah.
I feel like nowadays when you look at things like Angry Birds and I think even Minecraft that got announced recently, when it was hot versus when they got announced for the movies, it's such a departure and like it's lost all of its momentum that then they really were in tune with it. And I applauded for that because it was perfect. Everyone was fanning over it. And then the movie was coming out and I remember being like, oh shit, this is like, because I followed the show religiously. Like many of those episodes had me in tears. So many of those episodes had me.
Bye Butterfree, man.
Yeah, the Butterfree episode, the Pikachu one where he was like, go back, go, you found your people. So many of the episodes confused me when James was a fully feminine body in like a bikini contest. I think that episode got cut from American Syndicate, but 4Kids had it for a second. The Porygon seizure episode.
Oh yeah,
tripped me out. I've had so many like just following that, and then so when the movie was coming out, I remember for multiple reasons I was excited. One, it was just this culmination of all this excitement that I had with the franchise. But also because of the card game, I was really getting into that, and I was trying to play not competitively, but like find tournaments. And they had like hearing that they were gonna have the ancient Mewtwo card.
The ancient Mew, the like one that you would give.
Yeah, the ancient Mew. Yeah,
I still have a bunch of those cards somewhere.
Damn. Yeah. That that was an additional excitement for me of like, oh my god, I have to see this.
Right.
All of it just led to wanting to see this movie for so many different reasons. What about for you?
Yeah, no, because I was, huge into the show, and my relationship with the show has kind of like changed over time. Because I'm like, Ash kind of sucks. Like Red in the games is so iconic and cool and stoic, and Ash is just like a fucking idiot. I feel like sometimes, but like. I was like ready to go into this movie. Like I was like all fucking in. I saw it, I'm pretty sure, multiple times in theaters. I dragged my mom to go see it, so I kept getting that Mew card, and I have a distinct memory of going to see it one time, and it was like towards the end of its run, and the theater employee was like, "Dude, yeah, just take like fucking 20 of these cards because this isn't gonna be playing next week, so here you go." And I was like, "Fuck yeah, dude!" I was so excited. I remember the Weird Al song, and it was such a big thing in a moment, and I had it on VHS, and I just used to watch it over and over and over to the point where I remember like falling asleep in bed one night as a kid, and I was like, "How much of the movie can I just play in my head from memory?" Because I had seen that thing over and over and over, and it's interesting looking back at it now, right? Because this is a movie that we as kids were like, "This is the greatest thing ever," but American reviews at the time were very harsh. It was a big financial hit, but the reason I think it qualifies as underrated is it has an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. This movie got 8, fucking 8%. That's like, even by video game movie standards, that's pretty fucking bad.
That's insane. Well, that's wild. One of the things that I loved was just when you saw just the intro alone. I was like, they came at it with to be honest, like the Pokemon show, besides those like heartfelt episodes, largely standard kids stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the typical tropes, all the typical campiness, all the typical silliness. But the movie brought like a weight to it.
Yeah.
That I'm like, I'm surprised that it didn't get recognized, and even like from a critical standpoint in any regards to that.
Yeah, because watching it this time, I was like, holy shit, all this Mewtwo stuff is like fucking so intense. Like this like dark philosopher who's just like he's like a nihilist, like who's just like gonna destroy the world. Pokemon are pointless, and like there's that whole like beginning scene, like when Ash shows up, you're kind of like, okay, cool, like this is like the Pokemon thing. The narrator comes back, or whatever. But like the beginning when is like Mewtwo like turns on his creators and like burns down the lab, and then teams up with Giovanni, and for some reason Gary's there for a second. You're like, what the fuck is Gary doing here? Which threw me off. But
you never know what he's up to.
Right. It goes through this whole thing. And I actually, this time, it was hard to track down, but I found the original Japanese version with the like English subtitles, which was really hard to find because apparently that one was favorably looked on. Like Japanese critics really liked this movie, and it was the same thing that happened with a lot of episodes of the show and with a lot of the shows of these animes that were coming out of Japan at the time and getting put onto the WB, where the 4Kids thing, where a lot of the like anti-violence messaging and a lot of like the lines got changed in it, and I do think it works a lot better in the Japanese. Like, not that I think this is like a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like, okay, cool, like you can see how some things got kind of 4Kids up, reworked a little bit, and there's even this like extended prologue. Like I know the American one has like the Japanese vacation or the Pikachu's vacation. I don't know if you remember that, the like little short movie they did, because this movie's only like 75 minutes long, so they kind of needed to pad out the runtime.
I remember if I remember correctly, in the beginnings, it was like the introduction of some of the next gen were in this, and so like Meryl was like, "Oh my god, is that the next Pikachu? Is this the next hot thing?
Oh yeah,
is this Hansel?"
That fucking blew my fucking mind, right? Because this is way before Gen 2 comes out in America. This comes out in 98, so it's 2 full years before we would get Pokemon Gold. So you're seeing all these fucking Pokemon, and you're like, you had gotten Togepi. That was it. That was like
huge.
Yeah. But like getting that little prologue, and then in the movie proper too, you get Donphan. I remember just being like, holy shit, dude, like we're getting new fucking Pokemon, and then they're like, guess what, bitches, there's 100 new Pokemon coming to new games, and you're like, oh my god, let's fucking go.
Yeah, no, it was wild that not like the Donphan thing was really cool, but at the same time, it's always comedic to me that like Ash is notoriously known for not really evolving his Pokemon.
Yeah.
And just this Bulbasaur wrecking house with a hyper beam, and the Donphan just nuked him. I'm like, and then a Machamp comes out, and then his Squirtle just bubbles him in one hit. takes him out.
Yeah.
It was the equivalent of being the type of trainer in the games where it's like, I'm just gonna level my Pokemon through 100 to 100 and
Right.
then start going through the story stuff.
And also, it did bug me because it's what I think it's a Sand Slash that he sends out like 3 Pokemon. One is a Sand Slash, and
Yeah.
Pikachu beats him. I'm like, okay,
This
Sand Slash is definitely
is 3v1.
yeah. And I was like, Sand Slash is ground type. He's fucking immune to electricity. That was a big bugaboo of mine. But
His Pikachu's different. His build different.
right, yeah, there we go. But it's interesting because in the Japanese version, there's a different prologue that is all about like the scientist, which I think is Dr. Fuji. He's the Mr. Fuji in the game, but
Yeah.
like he's got like like you have the whole thing where like he goes to South America and they like find the fossil of Mew, like the eyelash or whatever, and then there's this scene where like there's other clones talking telepathically to Mewtwo, including he's like Dr. Fuji's like trying to clone his daughter who died, and there's this whole like it kind of like even further like makes this like story of Mewtwo just like deep and profound and powerful. And then they all like the other clones all like kind of die. It's implied Mewtwo lives, and that's kind of why he just like fucking rage quits and is like, you guys don't deserve to like humanity doesn't deserve to live. I'm gonna fucking create a storm that's gonna destroy everything. So I found all of that really fucking cool and interesting. So I felt that it helped a lot watching it as an adult, having that context. Do you think this one held up for you watching it as an adult as much as you loved it when you were a kid?
I mean, I definitely looked at it with some nostalgic lens, but I do still appreciate like what it was doing for its time. Like back
Right.
then, I think it was either things were super adult or super kid friendly. And this to me felt like it was bridging the gap a little bit. Granted, it's still a bunch of Pokemon and like they're all kind of just like trying to play with, from a parent's perspective, it's like that lens of like it's just some basic stuff. But I love that like for Mewtwo and for this questioning of creation and the subjugation, like that's always been on my mind in like the more present day my age now of like we're just forcing these Pokemon to battle and work subjugating them and all these like dark undertones that we've comedically been like, haha, it's Pokemon.
Yeah.
This movie I felt like was the first time it was kind of like, no, they have one of them got like the psychic Pokemon was smart enough to be like, we could overpower them. We should have our own rights.
Yeah.
Like we should rise up. But his answers were, or rather than like getting them all to side with him, were to clone them and everything. And then that I think is where things started to be like, well, you lost. You had a good idea. You had good reasons. Wrong execution there. But
Right.
I do feel like it helped. I do feel like it holds in a lot of big ways that I'm like, wow, this is like honestly, like I look at some of the movies nowadays, and some are really good. Like I love the Demon Slayer Mugen's Train. I thought that one was one of the best recent ones that came out that are like movies for the anime that they're respectively covering, and they've been getting better over the years, like with all the different stuff. But I don't think we would have gotten what we have with those if it wasn't for movies like this to come out. And honestly, I would say this is for the first movie as it's the title of the film, but I would also say it's for the Lugia one and the Entei one. Like all three of those were the quality of the bar was high, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you hit on a couple things that I really wanted to talk about here. One is, you mentioned Mewtwo's whole philosophy and questioning of like capturing Pokemon and making them do battles. This being like the first time it's really introduced. And I know you said you didn't play Black and White, but I think that one of my favorite things about that game is that is kind of the whole philosophy of, the quote unquote villainous team. And that's why that's one thing that I think those are the really underrated games. Like Black and White, I think are like straight up masterpieces. Arguably my favorite generation is Gen 5. And Mewtwo honestly feels a lot like he reminds me of N, the character in that. He's kind of your rival, kind of the villain, but also like he's very sympathetic, and there's this whole like it's almost like a Zelda game at points where there's like all this stuff about like truth and ideals and stuff. And N, a lot of the stuff that N is constantly saying is very reminiscent, I noticed this time around, to what Mewtwo was saying. And the other thing that you brought up is like this being a really important precursor to where we would get in terms of like these adaptations, and you brought up anime adaptations, and obviously this is that. But I also think also in terms of video game adaptations, because one of the things I'm talking about in this series is how, video game adaptations had a rough go of it for a while, especially in the 90s, and then in the 2000s, and eventually they would get better in the 2010s. I think that, like I talked about in the Silent Hill episode, that was a big turning point. But I think that video game adaptations, even today, have always had an advantage on TV rather than movies. It's always a lot, I feel like that's an adaptation that's a lot easier to do because you have a lot more time. You can build these characters because video games are a lot longer, so it's a lot harder to cram in the story to this smaller format. Where TV, you can have like a Fallout or a Last of Us, where you're able to tell these longer stories, and
Yeah, I
yeah,
agree. I feel like something back then, especially too from the video game angle. It's funny because you're right, and this is what it is. It's like it's video game adaptations. Pokemon was in that weird spot where it was anime and video games. It
right,
was
yeah,
getting
yeah,
both of them. So my head went to like those draw lines. But like even from the video game standpoint, I remember like the Sonic TV show was a
mm-hmm,
big thing, and there were several others. And it's like I think one of the things that like you're saying of what lends itself to TV as a medium better is the recurringness of, hey, we want these characters to be our brand icons. We want
yeah,
you to know Sonic. We want you to know Pikachu. We want you to be synonymous with like your Saturday mornings. And then when we put out a new game in that series, hey, this is at the forefront of your kids' minds, that kind of thing. It's I think definitely more accessible to kids in that sense. And then Pokemon being the giant that it was becoming was able to kind of pierce through a bit of that
mm-hmm.
in multiple ways. So you do yeah, you raise a good point there.
Yeah, and like I think you mentioning Sonic, like it was really a golden age for like kids TV shows based on video games. I don't know if all of them necessarily hold up, but there was like Sonic, there was Mega Man, there was even fucking Carmen Sandiego, and those were all ones that I was introduced to Pokemon through the video games first. But those are all ones where I saw the Sonic show, and then and I saw the Mega Man show, and then I would go play the games later on. Whereas
Yeah.
Pokemon was kind of the opposite, but I do think a lot of people came to the shows first, and then through that eventually went on to play the games because they were familiar with Pikachu. That's why Pokemon Yellow even exists, is because people would play the games and be like, this isn't enough like the show, like, and then so they're like, okay, we'll make a version that's like the show. But I think that that's why this movie kind of has an advantage over these other contemporary video game movies at the time, like Wing Commander, which would come out a year later. Because this is based on the show, or it's an extension of the show, you don't have to like explain the entire world of Pokemon and battling and all this video game lore. You don't have to do any of that stuff like a movie would like normally have to do, because people already know what Pokemon. They understand battling. They understand all these things. You can just have Mewtwo show up at the beginning. You can explain Mewtwo and Mew, right? And that whole thing, and not really have to worry about going into all this other stuff. So I think because it comes from an era where these kids video game shows were the predominant way that we were getting adaptations, it really does greatly benefit from that and allow us to focus in on the story of Mew and Mewtwo.
I agree. I think there's another thing to make sure we factor in is
Mhm.
unlike I guess Wing Commander and when did I forget timeline wise, when did Tron come out? The
Tron was
first
in
one.
'84. I do love Tron, but that one's not based on a video game. They did make a Tron video game. It is
That's true.
it is a video game movie, but it's not a video game
It's
adaptation.
not an
That's yeah,
adaptation. You're
yeah,
right.
yeah.
I just think like okay, so with Wing Commander, with Mortal
Mhm,
Kombat, with several of the others of like that early '90s
mhm,
period, I feel like they were appealing because it's live action and because of the
mhm,
subject matter. They were appealing more to the adult kind of side of like, hey, let's get the young kid, the folks that are going out of work and going on a date and want to watch something. I think this one of the things that was a big help is it was directly aimed at families and kids,
yeah,
getting that backing of like who's playing most of the games, who's bringing in like all that viewership, and then going straight for them in that kind of target of like let's get people into to recognize this, and then and then make sure it's a story that like okay a parent can enjoy and like have some semblance hopefully of a good time
right.
as potentially as an add-on as a benefit. But I think that being the ability to financially succeed, maybe not critically at the time, was largely due to that in a big way. But yeah, I do think that shouldn't outshine the quality of the film. As you're saying, is like the subject matter, the way it was filmed, the way it was shot. Like you look at some of those shots, and it was almost very like what's the Dr. Moreau, like his
Oh, the
island is
end of Dr. Moreau. Yeah,
he kind of gave vibes of like this is a you got an invitation to this island, and like
yeah.
there was an eeriness to it, and it carried weight with it of like this ominous tone and this Frankenstein like environment with this freak like project of like this happy go lucky kids thing with these
Right.
dark with these serious, and it's like it really held weight to it. I'm like, what is happening? Like
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
not Pokemon that I know, but it made you care because you were you wanted them to come out on top, and when they do their sacrifices, when they're doing things and they're in dire situations, you're like, oh shit, I'm really invested now.
Yeah, I think you're completely right about the tone of this movie being very different from the show, which is more kind of like very kiddie, very kind of like jokey, like, oh, we're getting into more hijinks, Team Rocket's blasting off or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie is like really serious and like at times pretty dark, and that's even toned down a lot in the English version, but I do think it really does still come across quite well, like the weird mysteriousness of the island, like it's like these trainers are gonna like maybe die in this storm or whatever, but they're still going out. And I love that, like, I don't know, like Dragonite was always one of my favorite Pokemon, and I think this might have been one of the first times you ever see Dragonite, but he's like the messenger, whatever. Like Dragonite flies, and you're like, oh fuck yeah, dude. And then there's a little bit of Ash goofiness there for a second, but as soon as they get the island, it's like, okay, this is fucking real business. Like the music's really good. They added, I think, in the original Japanese version, I don't think they had it, but I think they added it later on for re-releases in the American version. They had these
Mm,
like CG elements that were like
yeah.
they were like when like movie adapt kids you have the TV shows and they're like, no, we're gonna pull out the stops. This is gonna look so cool, and it's a little dated now. It's a little like 90s, but I was still at the time I was like, fuck, that's so cool. The
Yeah.
storm.
The scene was like, whoa, what is happening? I've never seen it like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that's crazy is like you look at like I guess the emotional investment. Like I
Mhm.
still tear up at the moments between when Ash has his selfless act and Pikachu. I look at the way that they convey emotion, both in the show and especially in this, and I look now and you look at how emotionally invested we are with characters like Groot
Mm.
and other characters of that ilk of like where they're saying so much with their just their tone and their body language and stuff. And I don't know, I think there's some parallels to be maybe drawn there of like maybe not directly inspired from this, but like this having the time that they've had with Pikachu and the attachment we've had, seeing how Pikachu shows affection
Mhm.
for Ash and just the fierceness and stuff. I remember back then I was like that was so in tune with it. I was like, I know what
Mhm.
Pikachu's saying. Even though I don't know what he's saying, I know what he's saying.
Right, you exactly. No.
I
Yeah.
felt like Meowth. I was like Meowth's there just like this translator for her. I was like, yeah, this is a heartfelt moment, all this stuff.
No, it really is because, like we said, like Mewtwo, like on the surface, it seems like what he's saying makes sense, but then Pikachu kind of comes back with like, no, like we're partners. Like I love traveling around with this guy, and because we've seen however many episodes of Pokemon, we're like, we know it's true. We know that like this is a special bond, and I got
Yeah.
emotional too. Like at the end when like Ash gets fucking turned to stone. And I'm like, I know he's gonna turn back. They're gonna cry and turn him into a person again, which I didn't understand. Like that didn't make any sense. Like, why does he become stone? Why does he turn back through tears? Doesn't really matter. But like that's still emotionally really hit. And I think that it's kind of like become almost like a meme now. But a lot of the stuff Mewtwo says is like really like deep and powerful. There's also the one that goes around the internet which like, I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. Like that's a powerful fucking line to just drop in a kids
Yeah,
movie.
he's just out here quoting Socrates and shit.
Yeah,
The mad philosopher. I
right.
would love to honestly like the way they built him up, it makes me
Hmm.
wish that other psychic Pokemon were also kind of like philosopher-esque.
Right, yeah,
Like
yeah.
like maybe Mew is more of like a musing like like monk of sorts where he's
Mm.
kind of like Yoda-esque and speaks in riddles, and Mr. Mime is kind of like maybe a French philosopher, and Alakazam is this like ennui, just like, yo bro, let me tell you about these spoons. There's different types of like thinking and high level thought. I'm like,
Right, yeah, yeah. Although I do straight up like love Mew in this movie. Like Mew for the first couple generations was definitely my favorite Pokemon, and getting to see him like show up and like he's just a scamp, you know what I mean? Like he's just this lovable little goofy guy who's like also like the most powerful fucking Pokemon in the world until Mewtwo comes around, and him like he's like I'm just gonna float on my little ball, and then he's like doing all this crazy psychic shit and have this intense battle, and you're like, but he's just like mew mew mew, and he's just like cute little floating around. I just love
Like,
that dichotomy.
there's exactly as you said. There's such a perfect dichotomy between Mew and Mewtwo. Of
Mhm.
just one is just overbearingly like waiting everything and thinking, and Mew's just like Mew, 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 just like free and at a whim of like this. What is life?
Right, yeah, totally. It's just I don't know, he's just so fun loving, and I think that it brings like because we talked about how this movie is kind of like more serious. It's nice to have that little lighter element, that fun thing, and also to have I would say Jesse and James and Meowth be Team Rocket be there as the comic relief. I love Team Rocket. It feels like they're utilized. At first, I was like, well, why are they in this movie? Like, they just kind of shoehorn them in. But I think they're important because, like you said, Meowth is kind of there to be the translator and to tell us kind of like what these Mew is saying when he's floating around, but also just kind of to like give the movie a little bit of levity that it needs.
Yeah. It's funny too. It's like I look at Mew and Mewtwo. I'm like, is that what happens when a child grows up? Like they go from carefree, la la la. And then Mewtwo's like, the weight of the world. What is going on with us? How can you all stand by and see let this happen?
Right.
I feel like I draw more parallels to Mewtwo nowadays as opposed to when I was younger. I was more like Mew.
Yeah, and also I'll just say, for back then, like now there's like some Pokemon that are like you have Arceus and stuff, some Pokemon that are maybe like on par with or like almost as good as Mewtwo, but like Mewtwo was like a fucking beast in Gen 1, especially because Psychic was overpowered and there wasn't, this is getting a little technical, but there wasn't the special split hadn't happened yet, so he was just a fucking beast.
You mean the like attack and special attack?
Yeah, because special attack there was in the first the first gen, there was only special was one stat. There was no special defense and special attack in Gen 1. And they in Gen 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like he had cuz he has a little bit lower it's little bit lower special defense. It's still good, but he has like a really high special, so
are you sure? Because it was I remember in the guide it was always the pentagram.
In Gen 1.
I gotta double check that because I remember all like looking through that guide for Gen 1, and it was always that like that diamond, and it was like HP, defense, attacks. Oh yeah, I mean I just remember the image. I don't remember if the stats, but I remember he was a stacked Pokemon, and I always had this bet with a friend because we would go even in high school we would whip out our OG cartridges, and I had a link cable, and what we would do is we would fight, and we'd always have the same team. He had his set Pokemon, I had my set Pokemon, and he always said like the only reason you win is because you're Mewtwo. We had no restrictions. We're just like
right, yeah,
whatever goes. And I told him like you underestimate my Snorlax. My Snorlax is the reason I can kick your ass.
Yeah,
and he's like, no way. And he was debating me there, and I was like, I'll trade you my Mewtwo. Use my Mewtwo against my Snorlax, and I will beat Mewtwo with my Snorlax, and I beat Mewtwo with my Snorlax.
Hell yeah, dude! I was like, dude.
Snorlax is the boy,
dude. Linked Pokemon battles back in the day was the fucking shit. Like that was the coolest thing in the world, and like I always remember my brother, my little brother. Also, this was Gold and Silver, but because he was a little bit younger, so by the time Gold and Silver came out, he was playing games, and I remember like the first 4 or 5 times we played, he beat me in the battles because he was one of those guys who just trained his starter, and I could never take his starter down. But then, because I equally loved my Pokemon, but then like the next 12 times, once I had gotten my team like balanced and like all like none of them was still as good as his starter, but I could take out his starter with like 2 or 3 Pokemon, and then just the rest of his team was all just trash. So I would just beat him every time, and he just kept trying to raise his starter because that was the kind of kid that he was. Where I was more like I've got to have a balanced team. I've got to have my Pidgeot and my Mewtwo and my Charizard or whatever. So yeah, that was totally me. But yeah, dude, I fucking love Pokemon battling.
The thing for the games, I'll say real quick, is it introduced me not just to the possibility of linked play like that on the just being the Game Boy was such a novelty back then. I was like, what can this thing not do? But also just the idea of glitches and like
Mm,
not hacking, but like I just knew of Game Shark, and I was like, oh, that's a
mhm,
device that then you put codes in and stuff. But this was the first time where I was like, people on the internet are talking, and I would go
mm.
and I was like, wait, what can I do? And you would do the whole missing no thing where it's
Yeah, the fucking going
have
up and down the coast.
the item at a certain point, like it has to be 6 down on your item list if you want that
Hmm.
item cloned. Then you go and talk to this guy. He teaches you how to do the Caterpie catch, and then you fly to Cinnabar Island and just go up and down the coast till this like abomination thing
Right.
goes up, and then you're like, there you go, 99 rare candies or master balls or whatever
Yep.
the hell. I'm
Exactly,
like,
dude.
what magical sorcery is this game?
Right. You'd like run into like a fucking level 126 Kangaskhan or some shit like that.
Yeah,
Like, dude,
it,
that was the
it,
fucking best. And it would fuck up your like Hall of Fame, but it was still worth it. Like, God, dude. That was yeah, like that was like the most famous. I think that might be the most famous video game glitch like of all time. Like the fucking missing no shit. Like that everybody at my school knew about that. That was like pre-internet, but still fucking like I mean it existed, but like a lot of us didn't have it yet, you know, it was like
yeah. No,
that.
it definitely like as from what a game can do and what is available to you as a kid, I was like, this is possible. Things like this can happen.
Yeah, right. You're just like, oh shit, this is, and then that would also like lead to like fake rumors. Like speaking of Mew, you know, there's the famous Mew behind the truck bullshit, you know, which
Yeah, yeah,
like it's like, oh, if you go get here before you can, and like, cause the truck was there, you know, it was just some
yeah.
random shit. But yeah,
Not
dude,
only
like,
did it blow my mind, it led to trust issues.
yes. Oh man, dude. But so speaking of the games, do you have a favorite Pokemon?
My favorite Pokemon is still Snorlax.
It's
I
still
love
Snow.
Snorlax.
Okay.
I love Snorlax. The stress I had of
Hmm.
catching Snorlax with the at the Poke Flute encounter on the bridges
Yeah.
was greatly overweighed any stress I had with any legendary Pokemon. I was always, even though I had two, you get two. I was
Yeah.
always like, this guy does not want to be like. I threw so many Pokeballs and Ultra Balls and every size Pokeball at him, and it took forever. And I had to like save right before, try to do it, fail, try to do it. His rest, his peril. I
Oh my
love
god, it's
Snorlax.
fucking rest.
Snorlax is like the chillest guy. He's the closest. He's like before Totoro. There to me, there was Snorlax was the
Hmm.
original, and then I discovered Totoro. But yeah, I love Snorlax so much. I'd say a close second is Gengar. He's just a
Yeah.
mischievous. To me, he's just like Snorlax and Ghost form.
Yeah.
Just a
No, that's
mischievous
great.
big boy. But what about you? Who's your favorite Pokemon?
My favorite, I love the like routes line a lot. You know, like routes,
Ooh,
Kirlia,
and the
Gallade, and then
Gardevoir.
and Gardevoir. Yeah, and Gardevoir. You know, like I don't. It's risky to say you like Gardevoir on the internet because it's like having Vaporeon. And I'm like, guys, I promise, it's just because. But I love Gardevoir because it's like just at the bond that it has with Pokemon. I love the lore of it. It starts out as this cute little guy with like a little thing, and he's like in tune with your feelings, and then he kind of eventually grows to be like the all the Pokedex descriptions talk about like the deep bond that Gardevoirs have with their trainers. And I actually still have, because this is the earliest gen you could do it in, moving them up, and it's also the gen that introduced Ralts and Gardevoir, is I still have my Gardevoir that I caught in like 2003 is on my current Pokemon team. I brought him up through every single gen. I brought him from the game. Like, you know, I traded him up from, you know, Ruby and then to like Diamond and then, you know, the Black all the way up to my current game. And he's a beast. I have that guy like fucking hyper trained and like he actually I didn't even know, even though I didn't know about natures at the time, he has a really good nature. So yeah, Gardevoir is just that whole line is just I
That's
absolutely just yeah.
that gen was a great gen. I
Mm.
love that was Gen 3, right?
Yeah, Gen 3, yeah.
Gen 3. I was looking real quick and I found out this is my
Oh hell
when
yeah.
I spent the most time on my lime green Game Boy Color.
Had the same color, man. That's fucking rad.
It still holds up to this day. It's so good. I love this
Dude,
thing.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know. Any other thoughts on the movie or like kind of just video game adaptations and stuff in general?
I definitely think like as you're saying the game adaptations and looking at what that time period looked like, there's a
Mhm.
lot to be contributed to the success of this film from a financial standpoint. Like I know you
Mhm.
said critically, and that's one of the reasons it's underrated, but I think that it succeeded in any way, shape, or form in the financial sense allows for studios to then be like, hey, let's pursue the games industry more. There could be something here, and we know many bombed.
Mhm.
Many did not succeed in any capacity, but I think that pursuit of trying it has led us to where we are today with the TV and films we got of like The Last of Us, Fallout, Arcane.
Mm,
all these different forms of like just seeing it. I'm excited to see where it keeps going. I just kind of wish we saw. I still enjoy. I remember it was like 5 or 6 years ago. I saw one of the newer Pokemon films, and
hmm
they're cool. But I kind of want them to have the weight they used to have
Yeah.
in a filmmaking capacity. I almost want them to. I don't know. I would love to see something that speaks to me now. And like the generation, it's always been like catered towards kids of Pokemon,
hmm
and that's this weird dichotomy of the us fans of the original growing up. We want the games to grow up with us, but
Right.
it it's like I want there to be a middle ground because I know that the movies are always going to be geared towards like getting more kids into it and stuff. But we see so much from Disney, and as a parallel of like they're able to do kids stuff with a weight. And this film was also the movie that blended the making it family friendly, but also having a lot of weight. And I'd love to see them do that again. I want them to find that lightning again, that magic.
Yeah, I
Um,
completely agree. And I think you bring up a good point with talking about how financially successful this movie is, because there had been video game movies before this, and I don't think any of them had really done that. None of them had done well critically, and they wouldn't do well critically until like 2019. But they like just like I talked about with Silent Hill being like a kind of a big first step in making them kind of critically successful, and this was critically pretty successful in Japan at least. It's not in America, but like this being such a huge box office success, like you said, led to future games and being able to be developed. And it is kind of in some ways, like I said, a there's a downside to that, but it also means like we are getting these Pokemon games. Scarlet and Violet, while I think it is kind of glitchy and broken and doesn't play super well, I think that story is incredible, right? Like
that story had some weight to it. I was like, oh shit,
Mhm.
what's happening here?
Right. And it's like I don't know if you would have gotten that if it wasn't for this movie. And I think that the reason like now video game movies are like very for the most part financially they're big things. At the time they really weren't. So I think this kind of proved like, oh no, this is a thing that we can adapt, and then,
Yeah.
not that much later we started getting like the Resident Evil movies and all these other movies that are adapting video games, and this is like the really the first one that paves the way for it. And I think that there was a lot of love in it. Like there's little things like the one of the guys who like is the trainer on the island. He's like an ace trainer or like a cool
Yeah.
trainer from the games, which I was like those were always like my favorite NPC class. I was like, oh dude, I want to be a cool trainer. Like that was
Yeah.
always I was a big thing for me. So yeah, I dug it.
There's one thing we didn't touch on, which is
Hmm.
I just remembered thinking back to the last Pokemon movie. The last Pokemon movie wasn't even one of the ones from the show. It was the Detective Pikachu film.
Yeah.
Then I think looking at that, I guess as the where the latest is at. Do you see things that like what did you feel about the connect like what we saw then versus what we see now? Because I think that movie was better received and it tried to do something different in that it was this live action effort in a weird way. And I know that like that's always a risky thing with the Pokemon stuff.
I mean, that movie, I absolutely love that movie. I think that movie is just it's great, and I feel like it's one of the few video game movies probably couldn't actually cover it underrated because it did well, and it actually I mentioned this on an earlier episode, but it's the first ever video game movie to get a positive score on Rotten Tomatoes
Oh,
ever, which is wild that it took almost 25, 30 years for a video game movie to be a critical, even moderately successful film. But since then, it's all like at least 2 out of 3 of them are. So I think that movie was like huge in terms of like video game adaptation. And I really think it's a good movie. It's well acted, and in the same way that like getting to see Pokemon in the first movie on the big screen animated, getting to
yeah.
see them like real life, what they actually looked like. My only complaint about that movie is that Gardevoir wasn't in, because if I had gotten to see like a like somebody throw like a route or even like a route, some like just a live action version of one of
Yeah.
my favorite Pokemons, I would have lost my shit. But it was still so cool to be like, oh my god, there's that Pokemon, there's
Yeah.
that Pokemon. Did you see there's an Ambipom over there? Like, oh my god, like there's this in the back, and it was really fucking cool. It starts out with the classic intro. That like start when you would start up the first Pokemon game and you have the Gengar fighting the Nidoran or
Yeah.
Nidorino. I fucking love that movie, dude. What did you think of it?
I enjoyed it a lot. It was a fun
Yeah.
experience. It kind of like rekindled some of the fun that I remember from the OG stuff and the
Mhm.
silliness, but also put like a bit of I mean, it still kind of had it in its own way. It's Mewtwo kind of like
Mhm.
culminating thing, but like it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
when seeing the live action stuff. I guess the last question I wanted to, or thing I want to talk about, you said in the video game movie side, is we've seen Mario
Mhm.
get its like adaptations and do wonders. We've seen Pokemon start it with this and go through to now. What do you think, or what are your thoughts and worries and hopes with the Legend of Zelda stuff?
I was wondering if that's what you're gonna ask, because you fucking know how much I love Zelda. Like
Yeah.
Zelda, oh my god, dude! Like Zelda's like I'm like one of those kids like who was like drawing Triforces on their hands and shit like that, and like
Yeah. Not the S, not that old S, but it was the Triforce.
right, exactly. And so, man, Zelda's a series that means so much to me, and for the longest time, I was like, dude, no, fucking just don't do it. Like, it's not gonna be good. Link's a silent protagonist. Those games are not inherently like, from a storytelling perspective. Like, I don't know how you translate, kind of just like, here, go to this dungeon, into like a narrative that works in film. So I was for like a long time, like, I don't know, and even after like the Mario movie came out, the new one, I was like, which I was not the biggest fan of. I think it might even my review at the time was like, please God, don't let them do a Zelda movie, because I was worried it was going to be like Illumination. And it's like, oh my god! And then they announced it was Wes Ball, and it was going to be
Yeah.
live action. And he's talked about how the films of Miyazaki and have been like an inspiration to him. I'm like, you're saying all of the right things. Like I like Wes Ball a lot as a director. He just did, another. He just just did the Planet of the Apes is another franchise that really means a lot to me. I think his Maze Runner films are really great. We covered them on Underrated a little while back. So I'm like, oh man, this guy seems to get it. So I'm like, we'll see. We'll see if it's good. I'm really, really hoping that it's good, but I want, so like, if there's a good Zelda, I'm gonna see it night one. Like, no question. I'm gonna be the first in fucking line to watch that movie. And it's like the thing is, like, there's a real chance for that movie to be good, which I didn't think was going to be a thing, and especially if you've ever seen like the old Zelda cartoon, which is god awful.
It's a dark time. Do you? I forget if they said, is it live action or is it?
It's going to be live action.
That's the part that I think I'm gonna have the most reservation on.
Mm.
I think when you said the whole inspiration from Miyazaki, I would love to see it with an artful animated kind of touch, of a Studio Ghibli-esque or a Pixar-esque studio, or even like the in a wildly artistic like Into the Spider-Verse like spin, like something very experimental, something different. Because especially like with all the play with time, the play with the things that are available in that world, like there's so much that they could play with. Are we gonna get? I feel like we're gonna get something more definitive and original in the sense that it's gonna be classic. Here's Link, Ganondorf, Zelda, Hyrule. I don't think we're going to get any of the spin-offs. I think I've been wondering whether we'd see whether it be an adaptation of any or strong influence from any one game,
Right.
or like the Mario one, it's kind of like this world. I don't know if it's as that. Yeah, I just wonder which way it'll go in that direction. If it's like, hey, we have a basic formula that's very reminiscent, familiar, but we're going to do something different, or we do something very traditional and like tied to what we know, the Master Sword, everyone and stuff. So I think I'm like you, where I'm cautiously optimistic. I definitely did weigh a lot of what I thought going into this movie based on what I saw from the Planet of the Apes film, which I thought was like, hey, here's an open world. It almost felt Breath of the Wild-esque in that film, but for Planet of the Apes. What's funny to me is I remember years ago seeing the King Arthur film that Guy Ritchie directed. And I remember, even though that wasn't a video game movie, that movie felt so much like a Guy Ritchie Legend of Zelda film. In the most way, I was like, he's doing all this stuff, and he's got this final battle with like Ganon potentially on the thing, and I'm like, he's got the Master Sword.
Yeah.
So much of it, I was like, okay, I could kind of see it, but that was an interesting take on it. I don't know. I have a few different thoughts in my head, but I'm interested. I'm curious.
Yeah, I kind of excited for the live action thing because like I thought it was going to be animated, and especially after like seeing the animated Mario movie, like I was like, don't let Illumination do it, man. Like, but then I'm like, which I know they made some good movies, but I'm like, dude, if you can make this shit like some Lord of the Rings, but for Zelda, like, fuck yeah, dude. And
That'd
like,
be cool,
right? You know, like so that's what I'm hoping for, and yeah, you know, so hopefully that one ends up being one of my favorites. Like I said, I love the live adaptation of Pokemon Detective Pikachu. I think was really good. So if we can see something like that for Zelda, and to bring it back to Pokemon a little bit, I think that Detective Pikachu is absolutely one of my favorite video game movies. And we've talked about it a little bit. So I want to ask you, do you have any other favorite video game adaptations, whether it be shows or movies?
Mortal Kombat. I love the first Mortal Kombat
The
movie
original
so
from the
much.
90s?
The original Mortal Kombat movie from the 90s
You
is
know
one
what?
of my all-time favorite movies.
That one, I will say too. I actually that one was, I think, pretty financially successful. So that
I
one did predate this one. So I got to give that props.
Nice, nice. I grew up watching that one
Mhm.
with my friend, and we would pause the end scene where it's Shang Tsung versus Liu Kang at the end, and Shang Tsung does the whole transformation into Liu's brother, and we would reenact that whole encounter, and we take turns playing who gets to play Shang Tsung as
Mhm.
the scene was happening on behind us on the TV. We're like, "Puberty fool," and then like, do all the crazy shit. I have such a passion for that film. It's so good.
Nice.
What about it for you?
Yeah, I think yeah, I'll stick with my Detective Pikachu for this one because I think that it really it like I was 30 something or like 29 when I saw that movie came out, and I felt exactly like I did when I was like 7 or 8 years old when I first played the original Pokemon.
Mm,
It really brought me back, and I just think it's a good movie. I think it's like a well-made, cool movie. Mewtwo, it's once again it's got Mewtwo as that like kind of like philosopher, and it had his voice by Bill Nye, and you're just like, yeah, dude, like this fucking rocks. You've got.
yeah.
I think that it utilizes Ryan Reynolds in a great way. I think Justice Smith is really fucking good in it. So yeah, I was a big fan of that movie.
What game do you want to see get adapted?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, obviously, like I've had my trepidations about the Zelda adaptation for a while now, but I am going to be very excited to see it. I think that they could do a really cool Golden Sun adaptation. I think that could be really good. What about
Okay.
you? What about you? What games would you like to see made into a movie or a show?
It's tough. I'd say there's I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, honestly, let's stick to the Nintendo franchise. I'd love to see the Metroid series get adapted.
That'd be
I would
cool.
love to see something like a mini series,
Hmm.
kind of like this weird, isolated, kind of original Alien esque,
Mm.
quiet, but maybe it's like over the course of the mini series, it goes from isolating, scary alien and turns into bombastic aliens, James
Mm.
Cameron esque like craziness.
Yeah.
That comes to mind, and another one that I feel like is a recent one I enjoyed is called Sifu. It's essentially
Okay.
like John Wick mixed with Old Boy. It's this like video game, martial arts game that just is you're on a revenge story. It's so good.
Very nice. That's cool.
I would say one of those two, but I do want to recommend something that might be underrated because I
Mm.
don't think anyone ever has heard of this movie, and I have the Blu-ray somewhere buried under my collection. It's not an adaptation, but it's a video game movie. It's called The FP. Have you heard of this movie?
No.
It's like underground DDR.
Okay.
It's this small town. It's like a very indie film, very low budget, everything. But like it's this little community that like they have street fight DDRs where they wear these
Mm.
crazy lethal boots, they fight and all this shit. It's such a great underrated campy film that's video based on video games. Well, not based
Okay.
on video games, but it's about video games. Like
Right. It's yeah. It's like one of those like Tron or like The Last Starfighter where it's not really an adaptation, but it's still a video game movie.
Yeah, it's very campy and very funny, but it's
Okay.
I
Hell yeah.
get like no one has heard of it until like I brought it and like, hey, let's watch this.
Okay. Nice. All right. All right. I'm gonna have to check that one out.
Yeah,
Awesome, man. Well, Krosh, thank you again so much for coming on. This was a blast. You obviously know so much about video games, so I was really glad to get your knowledge on that. It's really great I always have a great time geeking out with people about Pokemon. So this was the best, and I want episode 150. It had to be about this. Number 150 Mew versus 151 Mewtwo. Had to do it. One more time. Where can anybody get your stuff?
my socials are all the same. It's at Cujo Prime, but my YouTube, my show, the KJP Show, about indie games and game developers, celebrating and elevating them. It's youtube.com/@CujoPrime. You can check me out there. And you can find some of the articles I write for Temple of Geek at templeofgeek.com and their gaming section. I'm a regular writer there now.
Awesome. Definitely, all those links will be in the bio. Check all that stuff out. And yeah, for anybody who wants to know a little bit more about Underrated, we're on all the socials. Just look up Underrated Movie Podcast anywhere or go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. We also have a Patreon. If you want to just give us 5 stars and support us that way, it's very appreciated. But if you are able to donate a little bit more, we have as low as $1 options, $1, $3, and $5 on the Patreon, where you can get all kinds of bonus content, including some bonus podcasts, which Kurosh has also been on a couple times, talking about challengers. So that's a Patreon exclusive episode. So if you want to get some more of me and Kurosh, head over there, check it out. I highly recommend it. And then on Mondays when Underrated doesn't come out, I also do another podcast called the Midnight Film Society, where I kind of talk about usually more recently released movies. Me and my buddy Damien will review things over there. So, check that out on off weeks when you're not listening to Underrated. But yeah, this was a blast. One more time, Kurosh, thanks for coming on, and gotta catch them all.
Thanks for having me.